over there than it is over here. So I'll try to tell the comments that I was going to make. We left off with two questions. One, both against regarding the opinion of Rabbeinu Tam and Rashi. Rabbeinu Tam and Rashi say that when we say Yachid Korei Osam, that the last 8 psukim of the Torah is read by one individual, it means it can't be divided into more than one aliyah. It all has to be part of the same aliyah. And the question is why? And the second question was, the Gemara says that according to Reb Shimon, the same applies, that it's one aliyah, even though he says it was written by Moshe Rabbeinu, but it was written by Moshe Rabbeinu b'dema. And according to many we've shown him, and some say that's Rashi's opinion in Baba Basra, that means that instead of using ink, Moshe Rabbeinu, in writing the last 8 psukim, used the tears that were coming from his eyes while he was crying, while writing these last 8 psukim. And the question is, what is the significance of the fact that the last 8 psukim were written with tears? Now, the Gemara at the end of Megillah discusses in regard to the Tochacha. If one can make a stop in the middle of the Tochacha in Chumash, in Torah's Kahanim or not. And the Gemara says you can't, and the Gemara brings them on Chlokas as to why not. Rashi in Megillah and Tosfos, they mention that the Masechah Sofrim has a little different girsa than we have in the Gemara, and one of the reasons given by the Masechah Sofrim in explaining our Gemara is the reason you can't make stops in the middle of the Tochacha because it's based on a pasuk. You can't turn Musar Hashem into kotzin. And what's kotzin? Means into small parts. So, therefore, you can't make an aliyah. The question is, what's the significance? Why is it particularly into Musar Hashem, where God chastises us, as he does in the Tochacha, that you can't turn it into other aliyahs? But when we look at Kriyas HaTorah, the mitzvah of Kriyas HaTorah, we see it from 2 perspectives. The main perspective of Kriyas HaTorah is limud, learning Torah. However, there are certain parshios in Torah that when we read it, it is not only to viewed from the perspective of limud, but it has to be viewed from the perspective of re-experiencing. My uncle always would mention about the Aseres HaDibros, that the custom of standing during the Aseres HaDibros is that when we hear the Aseres HaDibros in Kriyas HaTorah, we're re-experiencing Matan Torah. So the same thing to a limited degree is true about Tochacha. In other words, if you're learning, at a certain point, you read and you stop and you try to understand what you read. But when you experience, when you make extra stops, so you no longer have the experience. So when it comes to the Tochacha, it's not enough to learn the Tochacha. You have to experience the Musar Hashem to make extra stops in the Tochacha. While it might contribute to the learning, it takes away from the experience of hearing the Musar Hashem. And I think there is a Rashi at the beginning of Mishpatim, when Moshe Rabbeinu goes up to Har Sinai for the 2nd time, 3rd time, whatever it is. So Moshe Rabbeinu goes up, and who accompanies him till Har Sinai? Vayokam Moshe v'Yeshua Mishorso v'Yal Moshe l'Har Elokim. So up till Har Sinai, or part of it, Yehoshua accompanies Moshe, and Yehoshua waits there. Everybody else stays in the camp. but Yehoshua accompanies Moshe till Har Sinai. And Rashi says, Lo Yadati, I don't know. Ma Tivo Shel Yehoshua Khan. What is the purpose of mentioning Yehoshua here? And I think, and Rashi suggests an answer. I want to suggest another answer. Perhaps Rashi means this as well. I don't know. The answer is, when it comes to Torah, halachos, the Torah has feelings. The Torah has emotions. And Moshe Rabbeinu himself, Moshe Rabbeinu was Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't just the messenger who brought Torah. His whole essence was Torah. That's why when Moshe Rabbeinu came down from Har Sinai, there were karnei or that came from his face. And when he wasn't teaching Torah, he wore a veil, just as a Sefer Torah. When we're not looking into a Sefer Torah, the Sefer Torah is covered. Moshe Rabbeinu taught not only with the words of his mouth, but with his feelings and his emotions that were seen on his face. Many of the Talmidim of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi said that they would have gained more from Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi if they had sat in a position where they could see his face while he was learning, while he was teaching. Because the feelings and the emotions of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, that was also Torah. Certainly in regard to Moshe, his feelings and emotions were Torah. And when Yehoshua accompanied Moshe, Yehoshua is the one Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai Msar Yehoshua. Yehoshua is the link to all future generations. Torah is only Torah that's passed over to future generations. So as far as Yehoshua was able to go, there was a need to have somebody. There was a need to have Yehoshua, who was the link to future generations, to give over the feelings, the emotions of Moshe Rabbeinu as he was going to Har Sinai, because that's Torah also. And I think, but that's not the type of Torah that you can learn from speeches. That's not the type of Torah that you can learn from shiur. That's the type of Torah that comes from experience. That's the type of Torah that comes from experience. And I think that this is the reason that according, in other words, in the last eight psukim that speak about the death of Moshe, they speak about Vayitku also b'nei Yisrael, that the Jewish people cried after the passing of Moshe. So those eight psukim are not just psukim of teaching. Those are psukim of experience. We have to experience the avelus that Klal Yisrael had for Moshe. And that's true according to the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says that who wrote those psukim? Those psukim were written by Yehoshua after Moshe Rabbeinu died. So those psukim represent the experience of the Jewish people, the experience of Yehoshua, the experience of the Jewish people after Moshe Rabbeinu died. But Reb Shimon says something else. Reb Shimon says, no, Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it. But Moshe Rabbeinu, when he wrote it, Moshe Rabbeinu was bidema. He was crying. And he used, according to many Rishonim, the tears to write those parshas in the Torah. Why? Because those tears of Moshe, but the experience, the feelings and the emotions of Moshe, that's part of Torah. And putting the tears, using the tears, that tells us, that was to give us the idea that we should know that Moshe's feelings and emotions, not just Moshe's words, not just the words that Moshe said, the words that Moshe wrote, but the feelings and emotions were also part of the Torah. And I think that now the question is, what was, so that's why there are no stops, because these psukim are psukim of experience, of re-experiencing. Now, what was the experience, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that Yehoshua wrote it, so we have to re-experience the Aveilus of Klal Yisrael. What did Klal Yisrael, what was the experience of Klal Yisrael after Moshe Rabbeinu died, when they realized that Moshe is no longer there? The person that was always there, their teacher, their Rebbe, was not there. The one that they relied on. The one that was who always taught them Torah. And to a large degree, when we think of the Yarhzeit, we find ourselves in a certain sense in a similar type of position. In other words, we think about what we had, and then when we realize what we don't have, in a certain sense, there's a certain sense of Aveilus. It's interesting, the Rambam in Moreh Nebuchim, when he talks about the purpose of the mitzvah of Sukkah, he says Sukkah reminds us of our traveling in the Midbar, because when we realize how tragic our situation was in the Midbar, that we had to live in huts, we can value Eretz Yisrael more. And I think when we have to use the Yarhzeit, to understand what my father was to us. My father was Rebbe. He taught, throughout his life. He started giving shiur in Tiferes Yerushalayim, and then in Chaim Berlin, in the heyday of Chaim Berlin, and then he was in Yeshiva University, and then he went to Chicago. What was significant about my father was not just the Rebbe for his shiur as a whole. He was a Rebbe for each individual in the shiur. If a boy had a problem, if my father was aware of it, he dealt with the problem. If he felt that there was a special emotional need a boy had, I'm not talking just about learning, but a boy had emotional need, he went out of his way to have the boy come to our house, whether it was for Shabbos. There was one fellow who retired recently from the rabbinate. He told me he wasn't from those who excelled in learning. And my father, and he was the Yordea shiur. And my father called him privately, and he said, "Come Friday afternoon, to my house, and I'll go over the Yordea with you." We didn't know about it. I only found out about it after my father passed away. And he says, "Why Friday afternoon?" He said he didn't want the boy to be embarrassed. My mother would be teaching Friday afternoon. He didn't want anybody in the house. What did that show? That showed sensitivity, concern for each individual's talmid, each individual student. And my father's job as a Rebbe, my father saw his job as a Rebbe not just as a job, but it was a relationship. He did not consider people less of a talmid after they left the shiur. They remained talmidim. That's the idea that a Rebbe has to be v'shinantam lebanecha elu talmidecha. A Rebbe has to be like a parent. When a child gets married and moves to his own house, the parent still remains a parent. But it's rare that a Rebbe really remains a Rebbe. And my father was that rare type of Rebbe who was always always there to help his former Talmidim. But it wasn't just Talmidim. It was anybody that was in need. There were people who had children that were handicapped. And my father was Moshe Nefesh. I remember there was a certain man in Chicago, and they were going, for whatever reason, he was going to be thrown out of his apartment. He had two mentally handicapped children. He had no place to go. And there were important people that were connected with the owner of the building. And my father, at great risk, he suffered from it. He suffered because of it. He did not let the owner of the building force these people out of their apartment until my father went around from house to house to raise money to buy an apartment for them. And up till that point, my father didn't even know these people. But this is my father, anybody who was in trouble, and those who, when Pollard was in trouble, when he was in the jail, my father worked very hard on his behalf. My father went down, when Chaim Margolis is there. He gathered with myself, we went with my father to talk to him. My father tried to put pressure. He wasn't successful for whatever reason, but my father continued. And my father, when people in the Orthodox community in Chicago who worked against my father were in legal trouble, my father was Moshe Nefesh. He was sick. He went to Washington. I'm telling you, I was scared for him because he was sick at the time. But he went to Washington to plead with the Attorney General on their behalf. And these weren't people, were his supporters. But they were Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael. They were our brothers. So when others look, so by Yifko also Kol Beis Yisrael, everybody, there's a lot to learn, because today we have many, many of these same problems. And there is no one around to do these things. Yes, people will collect for organizations that attend to difficult situations. But who will work for individuals? And individuals who up to that point, they didn't know who they were. But Rav Yehuda says that, Rav Shimon says that Rav Shimon says that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote the Parsha, but still we have to experience. Why do we have to experience? Because the Dem Apostle, he wrote it with his tears. Now, why did Moshe Rabbeinu cry? Why did Moshe Rabbeinu cry? We know why Klal Yisrael cried. Was Moshe Rabbeinu scared about his portion in the next world? Obviously not. But Moshe Rabbeinu saw that he had a mission. And his mission, he felt, wouldn't be able. His mission was to bring the Jewish people into Eretz Israel. And he thought that he wouldn't be able to complete that mission. He recognized he wouldn't be able to complete that mission. So he cried. He cried as he was writing Vayomas Moshe, because that represented the end of what he was able to do towards finishing his mission. But the mission itself was never, he wouldn't be able to fulfill. And there is so much in life and in my father's life that he wanted to do and he wasn't able to do. The Medrash says that when Shmuel HaKatan died, so the Chachamim placed on Shmuel HaKatan's coffin, they placed a pincus, a book that the people wrote what they did, what sales they made, whatever it is, and they placed the key. The pincus represented, my father said, what Shmuel HaKatan did in his life. But Chazal tell us that by Shmuel HaKatan, Royi Shetishrel of Shechina, he deserved to have Shechina on him. Ela Shelo Zocha Hador Lekach. But the generation did not merit to have it. My father accomplished so much. He worked for everybody. And it made no difference who it was. And as I mentioned before, his Torah was not just the shiurim. His Torah was his very being. His Torah was his personality trait. His Torah was his concern for everybody. But like Shmuel HaKatan, if he had more help, if more people would have worked together with him, then he would have been able to accomplish more. And those are the keys. The keys represent the locked doors, the doors that were not yet open. And on the coffin of Shmuel HaKatan, they placed the pincus which represented what he accomplished. And they put the keys also, my father said, that was indicative of the things that had he had the cooperation, had the door been zocha to it, that he would have accomplished. And that was indicative that in the next world, he would be recognized as having accomplished it. Now, there was a very interesting message. My father would always mention that the Rebitzel of Volozhiner said at the Levaya of Reb Chaim Volozhiner, the Medrash says that when the Korban was taking place, the Pirkei Kahuna, they took the keys of the Beis Hamikdash and they threw it heavenward. And a hand came out of heaven and grabbed the keys. And Reb Chaim Volozhiner and Reb Yitzchak Volozhiner said, the Pirkei Kahuna made a mistake. Had they not thrown the keys heavenward, the Beis Hamikdash would have been rebuilt. What did the keys represent? Throwing it heavenward means we leave it to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But we all have a mission in this world. We have to become HaKadosh Baruch Hu's agent in building Torah, in helping everybody. We can't just throw it heavenward. We have to take the keys ourselves. And there was a lot. My father accomplished so much. My father is the one who I think played the biggest role in introducing the learning of Rishonim in yeshivas. We see America today. We see what they learn today. But my father started to term the noise. And he had a big influence. He had a big influence on the way halakha is observed. Today, the observance of Yashan, who started it? We see Echad Haya Avram Avinu. Avram was the first one. Where do you find the mitzvah that a certain person could be the first one in the world to start it again? The world did not observe Yashan. No one observed it. I know there's a machlokas, and I'm not trying to find fault. with anybody who didn't observe it. But initially, when Jews came, when we came to it, when the Jews came from Europe, there was no problem in America. And who was the first one? My father noticed that the situation changed when he visited the mills. And because of that, he introduced the observance of Yashan. And Yashan is a symbol of his commitment to Torah. He wasn't interested in doing things that were popular, that will make him accepted. On the contrary, when he started the observance of Yashan, people tried to make the non-observance of Yashan as a chumrah. People used to sit at his table and say, pass the Chodesh plate. Because they couldn't deal with the fact that someone was the Yerushalayim and did something that wasn't accepted. Their attitude towards Chumrah is because I want to be part of the group. My father was Machmir. He wasn't Machmir to be Machmir. He was Machmir because of his Yerushalayim, because of his commitment to Torah, because of his commitment to Halacha. That's why he was Machmir. So that was expressive of his personality traits. Yerushalayim is not just an external trait. Yerushalayim has to come from inside. So in the words of Rav Volozhiner, what we have to do is we can't just say we leave it up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We have to work. We have to use my father as an example. We have to learn not only from his shiurim. Of course, we have to continue to learn from his shiurim, but we have to learn from his personality. We have to learn from his character traits. We have to learn from his Yerushalayim. These are the keys of Shmuel HaKatan. But we have to keep these keys. And in a sense, my uncle once said, Moshe Rabbeinu did not finish his mission. He wasn't able to finish his mission. No person is able to finish their mission. But it's our job to continue that mission. And when we come on the Yarhzeit, I think that's what we have to understand. We have to understand that the mission continues. And if we continue that mission, we keep my father, that's our life.